Good evening. So last week we were looking at the afflictions, looking at the actual identification of the mental afflictions, the stages by which they arise, and now we're starting at the faults of the mental afflictions. So on page 170, we start with a quotation from Maitreya's Ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. And I'll just change the second line a bit. The mental afflictions destroy you, destroy sentient beings, and destroy your ethics. Degenerated, your gain declines, guardians and teachers revile you. There will be nasty disputes, you will take rebirth elsewhere in unfree states, and through the loss of what you have attained or had hoped to attain, there is great mental suffering. When we're looking at the trainings that are shared with practitioners of initial capacity, within that presentation, we looked explicitly at the sufferings that are being experienced by beings in the lower realms. Now that we are in the trainings that are shared with practitioners of intermediate capacity, we have recently completed looking at the sufferings of beings in the higher realms, namely humans and gods. This then comprises the reflections on true sufferings. Coming to a deep understanding of suffering and how it pervades our experience in cyclic existence, one gives rise to a strong wish to be free of suffering. But to be free of suffering, one has to know the origin or the cause of one's suffering. Because without abandoning the cause, a mere wish to be free of something will not lead to freedom from it. So now we've been looking at, more recently, true origins, the origins of suffering. And these are contaminated karma and afflictions. Of these, as we saw last week, the afflictions are primary. Because if one has abandoned the afflictions, whilst one will still have previously accumulated contaminated karma on one's continuum, with afflictions abandoned, that previously accumulated karma cannot ripen. It cannot cause any suffering. Moreover, with the afflictions abandoned, no further karma will be accumulated. But if, let's say, one has somehow managed to purify all of one's karma, but the afflictions haven't been abandoned, one will immediately accumulate further contaminated karma. So therefore, of these, the two origins of our suffering, the afflictions are primary, karma is secondary. Hence, Lama Tsongkhapa has first presented the afflictions. The afflictions are often presented as 6 root afflictions and 20 secondary afflictions. Here, as we looked at last week, the presentation is of those 6 root afflictions, but expanded into 10. So we looked at that last week so that one can come to know what these afflictions are. Because if we hear that these are the primary cause of our suffering, we have to be able to identify them. We then saw how they arose, and now we are starting to look in detail at the faults of the afflictions, also as to give us the strength of mind to abandon them, to have the strong self-discipline, not to come under the sway of the afflictions, to be on the lookout for them and not come under their influence. What's presented here is something we've touched on many times, the faults of the afflictions. Nevertheless, we need to come to recognize these with vivid clarity so that one has a revulsion for the afflictions, seeing them as our true enemy. So looking at the first line from the Ornament of Mahayana Sutras, from this verse, the mental afflictions destroy you, destroy sentient beings, and destroy your ethics. So through the mere arisal of an affliction, whether it's attachment, anger, or any other affliction, immediately, through its mere arisal, we are harmed. Our good mood is lost. Any peace of mind that we had been experiencing is lost. Our mind narrows and we become agitated, afflicted. So immediately, our happiness is lost. And then, through the affliction, we accumulate contaminated karma that will lead to suffering in this life and lives to come. And in lives to come, it can even lead to us falling in the low realms where we experience intense suffering. So in this way, we recognize that the mental afflictions destroy you, in the sense that they destroy your happiness now, as well as later in this life, as well as in lives to come. As we see in the first line, not only do the afflictions destroy you, they destroy sentient beings, those other than yourself. In that, the afflictions arising within your own continuum, again, whichever one it may be, attachment, anger, pride, whichever, through your mind becoming afflicted, we have an impact on others. Whether it's just through the change in our facial expression or our physical posture, the way we carry ourselves, or through the expression of an afflicted mind leading to afflicted behavior, we bring harm to others. This harm can come through things we say, saying words which cut others, hurt them deeply. It can lead to us acting physically in ways that harm others, whether it's through violence or through stealing from others. So we see in this way, through the mere arisal of afflictions within ourselves, not only does it destroy our own happiness, but it destroys the happiness of others. And thirdly, the arisal of the afflictions destroys your ethics. So it destroys one's ethics whether one is ordained or not ordained, whether one has vows or doesn't have vows. So if one has willingly taken on vows, whether the vows of the ordained or non-ordained, through the afflictions, those vows can be broken. So for the ordained, it can lead to the breaking of celibacy. For the non-ordained, it can lead to sexual misconduct. Certainly through the afflictions, the ordained or non-ordained can kill, can steal, can lie. So in these ways, through the afflictions, the vows that one has willingly embraced, these get broken, these degenerate. But beyond the vows that one has taken, the 10 non-virtues, one falls into the 10 non-virtues by means of the afflictions. The 10 non-virtues necessarily are associated with the afflictions, whether anger or of its class, attachment or of its class, or ignorance. So in this way, through harsh speech, stealing, and other forms of the 10 non-virtues, or the breaking of vows, one's ethics is destroyed. Then the second line, so just the first half, the part that I changed the translation, degenerated, your gain declines. So this then is specific to those who've taken the vows of the ordained. Having the vows of the ordained on one's continuum, one becomes a suitable object by which others can gain merit by making offerings and so forth. But should one's vows then degenerate which would be because of the afflictions, then one's gain declines. In other words, one no longer becomes, no longer having the vows on one's continuum, one no longer is a source for others to gain merit. Therefore, one's ability to sustain oneself, so this is your gain declines, your ability to sustain yourself it declines, and therefore that impedes one's spiritual development tremendously. The next line, degenerated, your gain declines. Guardians and teachers revile you. So guardians or protectors, these refer to those beings, those unseen beings who've promised to protect those who are engaging in the Dharma. So this would most explicitly refer to those with any vows on their continuum, but through those vows declining by means or degenerating because of their afflictions, the protectors no longer care for one in the same way, as the promise they made was to help those engaging in the Dharma, not those acting under the influence of the afflictions. And then this teacher should be an uppercase teacher, so referring to the Buddhas or Buddha Shakyamuni to be explicit, in that through the arisal of the afflictions, then the vows that the Buddha introduced, those and that one has willingly accepted, have declined. And that then leads, revile is a bit of a strong word, but maybe disappointed. The third line, there'll be nasty disputes. So through the arisal of the afflictions and the degeneration or the breaking of vows, harmony is destroyed, thereby leading to nasty disputes, to aggression, and to a lack of harmony. Through the afflictions, in particular, but not exclusively to the breaking of vows, one creates the causes that will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. The final line, through the loss of what you had attained or had hoped to attain. So through the arisal of the afflictions and their expression leading to the degeneration of one's vows, then this has an impact in further impacts in that the virtue that one has accumulated, this declines, this is harmed. Moreover, the good qualities one has attained, now because of acting under the influence of the afflictions, these too decline. And these good qualities that you have developed, because they're declining, they are not developing. And moreover, your previously expected spiritual development, this is stopped because of the decline in one's attainment. So the qualities that one has developed, these decline, and one's hopes for further development, these cannot be fulfilled. And finally, there is great mental suffering. So through having come under the influence and acted under the influence of the afflictions, having created all this harm for oneself and through its expression for others, this leads to tremendous unhappiness. By engaging in the reflections that are being covered here, but the reflections on the faults of the afflictions, needs to lead to this clear recognition of the faults of the afflictions. And that, the very purpose of our practice is to apply antidotes and thereby abandon the afflictions. This needs to be very clear to us, that the afflictions only cause harm. And in this process of causing harm, they deceive us, influence us to do what is actually against our wishes, whilst we think this will lead to happiness. We need to recognize them for what they are and apply antidotes to them diligently, continuously. As I mentioned at the start of the talk, the afflictions are usually presented as 6 root afflictions and 20 secondary afflictions. So last week we looked at the 6 roots, but expanded into 10. But however one looks at it, really it comes down to the 3 root afflictions of ignorance, attachment, and anger, or the 3 poisons of ignorance, attachment, and anger. And of these, the primary affliction is ignorance, in particular, the ignorance of self-grasping. And as we saw last week, the reason why this ignorance of self-grasping is primary is because from it follows both attachment and anger. The attachment of I want and the anger of I don't want. And from these afflictions, all the others will come, pride and so forth, as well as then acting under the influence of these afflictions. And we will act in ways either physically, say, causing physical harm to others or stealing from them, or verbally, abusing others, lying to others, and so forth. So through recognizing the great faults of the afflictions, and that the primary affliction, the root cause of all the afflictions is the ignorance of self-grasping, we come to recognize I have to develop the antidote to the ignorance of self-grasping, namely the wisdom realizing selflessness. With this ignorance, the ignorance of self-grasping being the root of all our afflictions is something we looked at last time. We spoke about the view of the transitory collection, and also we have been looking at in the Wednesday night series of teachings on Shantideva's engaging in the Bodhisattva's way of life, where we've spoken about the I or self as being grasped at as being self-existent, existing from its own side. So it's that grasping at the I or the self as existing from its own side that is the root of all our afflictions. And as we've been looking at in the Wednesday classes, we need to come to recognize that we are under the control of others, namely the afflictions. We are not autonomous, we don't have free will, we are not independent, but are rather dependent. namely on their afflictions. So this is why we need to come to understand the wisdom realizing selflessness, and one does so through recognizing that the self is not inherently existent, or to express that differently, that the self is not independent, but dependent. We are in the section of the text looking at true origins, the origin of one's suffering. And that, we just pointed out again, is the ignorance of self-grasping. From this come all the afflictions, and from that, the accumulation of contaminated karma and our suffering, our remaining bound in these suffering realms of samsara. Hence, in particular, this ignorance of self-grasping needs to be abandoned. So this is the main topic of what we're looking at here in the Lamrim, and it's also what is presented in the Bodhisattva's way of life. So now, Lama Tsongkhapa quotes 6 verses from the chapter on conscientiousness. So I've just changed one word in the first line. Enemies such as anger and craving do not have arms, legs, and so on. They have no valor either. So why is it that they have reduced me to servitude? While abiding in my mind, they happily inflict harm on me. The patience that does not get angry at them is unsuitable, blameworthy patience. Even if the gods and demigods were all to rise as enemies against me, they could not lead or put me into the fires of the Vichy hell. The mental afflictions, those powerful foes, throw me into it in one instant, where nothing met with, not even Mount Meru is left behind, not even ashes. Compared to my foes, the mental afflictions protracted, with neither beginning nor end. Not one of all my other enemies could possibly endure so long. While everyone helps you and makes you happy, when you act harmoniously and with reverence, if you attend to mental afflictions, they inflict suffering and harm in return. Reflect on these faults stated here. Looking at the first quoted verse. Enemies such as anger and craving do not have arms, legs, and so on. Here, this first line points to a crucial recognition that enemies, those that cause us unhappiness, they do not abide outside of us. They abide within. It's not people in our lives or material circumstances that is the actual cause of all our unhappiness. The actual cause dwells within us. The cause of all our unhappiness now and later in this life and in lives to come dwells within us. And despite having no physical form, no arms and legs, they cause us all our suffering and pain. And despite not being courageous, not being clever, in fact, they are deluded, they have somehow enslaved me. This then is the meaning of the first verse. This we need to investigate. How has it come to pass that I've been enslaved by what is deluded? How has it come to pass that I have no freedom, but I am under the control of these delusions? Let's take something that we all do every day. Before leaving our home, we always prepare ourselves physically. We look at what we're wearing, we look at our face, and we make sure we are presentable. So this is something we do. We don't really think about it beyond, this is what we do, but you don't really think about why is it that I do this. If we look very deeply, we'll see it really comes down to grasping at the self. And from grasping at the self as being self-existent follows attachment, aversion, and so forth. So in this example, that we have attachment to ourself in terms of being and expressed as concern for what others may think of us or say about us, about our physical appearance. So we don't need to go through some kind of intentional thought process to be concerned about how we present ourselves before others because of what they may say or think. This comes naturally to us, this innate self-grasping. But from this comes our attachment. Then we leave the home, and should one person just look at us in a way that we feel is an expression of disapproval, let alone if they say something to us, it hurts us, it cuts us. And it may dominate our mind for a long time afterwards, leading us to talk about it. This is even if someone just looked at us in a strange way without even saying anything. So this is very normal. But this is an expression of this innate self-grasping leading to attachment. Next verse. The next verse. Whilst abiding in my mind, they happily inflict harm on me. The first line then identifies where this enemy is to be found. So this is crucial. We need to know where to look. So readily, we know it's within. The enemy of the afflictions abides within. But you need to be very aware of how they present themselves, because, as it says in the second line, they happily inflict harm on me. This is not how they always present themselves, though. They very easily deceive us. It is their very nature to deceive us, to delude us. And they present themselves as our friends, as our protectors. But the truth is, they are always at the ready to harm us. They do so at their pleasure. The first line identifies where these enemies are to be found, and the second line identifies their deceptive nature. And the third and fourth, the patience that does not get angry at them is unsuitable, blameworthy patience. The meaning of these two lines is that we should not allow ourselves to be deceived by the manner in which the afflictions may present themselves. They may present themselves as a protector, as a bringer of happiness, but this is their deceptive nature in full force. We need to never accept this, never accept that they are anything other than our enemies. We need to come to recognize them as harmful no matter the guise, because it's all too easy to develop an attitude, I'll abandon the afflictions. But when they present themselves as a friend, as a protector, as a bringer of happiness, then we patiently endure them because we think they are here as our friends. We need to see them for what they are and never see the patience with them as appropriate, but rather as contemptible. The third verse, even if the gods and demigods were all to rise as enemies against me, they could not lead or put me into the fires of the Avicii hell. So this then also points to that the afflictions are only our enemies, and they are our worst of enemies. Because if even the people with the most power over us in this life, or the most vicious of animals, or even unseen beings, gods and demigods, if all of them were to gang up on us and strive to harm us, whilst they could inflict terrible pain, that pain would only need to be endured in this one life. They cannot harm us beyond this life. The afflictions, though, can. The afflictions, though, harm us in this life and lives to come. So this verse then serves to point out just how harmful the afflictions are and why they are our true enemy. The fourth verse, the mental afflictions, these powerful foes, throw me into it in one instant, where nothing met with, not even Mount Meru is left behind, not even ashes. So this builds on the immediately previous verse, which it states that the afflictions don't only harm us in this life. All the gods, humans and animals, they can inflict immense suffering upon us, but only suffering that will be experienced in this life. The afflictions lead to our suffering both now and in lives to come. This is the outstanding feature of them, not just the intensity, but the length and duration of the suffering. It's both of these. So it's through the afflictions that we will suffer in this and lives to come. And the suffering, it refers here in this verse, refers to the suffering of the hells. So the suffering that comes from the afflictions is beyond anything that we can experience as a human, that any human being is experiencing right now, as even though many are experiencing immense suffering, the afflictions, because they can throw us to the lower realms, lead to pain and hopelessness beyond comprehension. The meaning here is to really come to recognize that our sole enemy are these afflictions. Because normally when we think about those who cause us unhappiness, we'll usually think about other people. We may even wish, oh, I was a bit different, or my circumstances, my material conditions were different. But whilst we do experience problems from a variety of sources, they pale into insignificance when compared to the afflictions, because of that the afflictions harm us both now, throughout this life, and lives to come. So we need to recognize that the afflictions harm us in inconceivable ways over an inconceivable period of time, and they have an inconceivable strength. In other words, all that we have experienced and can experience still in this life in terms of suffering pales when compared to the suffering that the afflictions can lead us to. All the other problems that we have experienced in this life, they've come and they've gone. The others that we are experiencing, will experience, will come and go too. But the suffering from the afflictions, that suffering is particularly intense, and experienced over lifetimes and in a wide variety of means. So what this comes down to is by recognizing that the afflictions are our true enemy. Whenever we experience an unwanted circumstance of any type, look to your response to that. Look to the afflictions, because that is our real enemy. The 5th verse, compared to my foes, the mental afflictions, protracted with neither beginning nor end. So just these first 2 lines. So I've spoken about how the afflictions cause us to suffer now, how they will cause us to suffer throughout this life and lives to come. But the truth is, they have also been causing us to suffer previously in this life and in lives previous to this. Life after life, we have been suffering because of these afflictions. And this situation that we find ourselves in will just continue until we finally manage to succeed in gaining victory over them, abandoning them, eliminating them completely. The 3rd and 4th line, not one of all my other enemies could possibly endure so long. So in this life, we've had many difficult times and unhappy situations, but these have come and they have gone. These afflictions, they have no ordinary enemy that is comparable to them. Ordinary enemies, we can befriend them. Situations may change, they may unexpectedly offer us support, but these afflictions never do. They never change, they only cause harm. They sometimes are very successful in deceiving us, thinking they're a friend, a bringer of happiness or protector, but it's always the same. They cause us pain, they cause us suffering. And moreover, all the enemies we've had or will have in this life, we have left them behind at one point. Even the final enemies we have at the end of our life, we will leave them behind when we die. The afflictions are not like that. They accompany us, often as a shadow, all too often dominant within us. This makes the afflictions stand out. They are unique. And in this way, we recognize they are our true enemies. The final verse from Entering the Bodhisattva Way. While everyone helps you and makes you happy, while everyone helps you and makes you happy when you act harmoniously and with reverence, if you attend to mental afflictions, they inflict suffering and harm in return. Here then, there have been people in this life, also with animals, whom we don't have a good relationship with, that we would consider an enemy. But we also know from our lived experience, those relationships aren't fixed and they can improve. By acting harmoniously with others, treating them with respect, even if you don't get on with them, that relationship can change. By offering a hand of friendship, by in particular being there in a time of need. Relationships that were marked with competitiveness or with jealousy can change. So this we have experience of We know that it can happen, and ideally we should develop harmonious relationships with all. But with these inner enemies, the more we indulge them, when we try and act in accordance with their wishes, try and be agreeable or respectful towards them, they will only harm us ever more. They will deceive us only ever more. The afflictions cannot be indulged. They cannot be treated with reverence. By doing so, only further suffering comes. They are entirely different from our normal worldly enemies. Afflictions can never be a friend. They can never be a bringer of happiness, no matter how they present themselves. And therefore, we must strive to abandon them. Lama Tsongkhapa concludes with, reflect on the fault stated here being both entering the Bodhisattva way as well as before the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. So we need to reflect on the faults of the afflictions, coming to know them well, see them very clearly, so that we come to recognize that the afflictions are always our enemies. No matter how they present themselves, they are not to be followed. We need to come to the point where we recognize there is nothing more important than abandoning the afflictions. This needs to be the priority of how I live my life, of how I follow my mind. I must no longer indulge the afflictions, no longer allow myself to be deceived by them, no longer see them as a means to bring me happiness, no longer see them as a protector from suffering. Rather, I must strive to abandon the afflictions and gain freedom from them. So we, in the text, on the section of the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, started by looking at suffering, so true sufferings. And this first noble truth, the Buddha taught, needs to be known. So there we looked at the threefold, then the eightfold, then the sixfold presentation of suffering, and then the sufferings of general sufferings of the higher realms, to come to know suffering. Here we come to know the origins of suffering, which now, coming to recognize them, we need to strive to abandon them. So here the reflection really is to come to recognize just how harmful the afflictions are, and that they are always harmful. That if they are indulged now and again, if they are followed, seen as a source of happiness or protection, that will only lead to further suffering. To come to recognize what's important is not as important. What's more important than dealing with what is around me is dealing with my response to what I encounter, and ensuring that when I encounter hardship and afflictions arise, that I deal with that, where I deal with the afflictions. When I encounter pleasant circumstances, that I ensure I don't get deceived by the afflictions. So here the outcome needs to be to abandon the afflictions. I need to take sure of look after how I respond to what I encounter. And this is also further aided by the recognition that it's by abandoning the afflictions that we gain freedom from suffering. Or to express it differently, by abandoning the afflictions, we gain liberation from the sufferings of samsara. Because it's these afflictions that bind us into this prison, that are the walls, are the bars of this prison. It's by destroying these afflictions we gain our freedom, our liberation. Last year, when we were looking at the training shared with practitioners of initial capacity, we came to the teachings on refuge, or protecting refuge. And there we saw the cause for refuge is fear and faith. So fear and faith are the causes for seeking protecting refuge. And as one grows as a practitioner, one's refuge deepens. And refuge deepens whilst the causes remain the same, being fear and faith. But the fear, this changes, and our faith, through our growing, developing the Dharma within, our faith in the Dharma in particular, deepens. So the practitioner of initial capacity, when they go for refuge, their motivation is they turn to the three jewels for protecting refuge from the sufferings of the lower realms. And they have deep and abiding faith or trust in the three jewels that by developing the Dharma within, I will gain protection from the sufferings of the lower realms. Training now further in the training shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. When one turns to the three jewels for protecting refuge, fear arises now not solely for the suffering of the lower realms, but fear in relation to the sufferings of samsara in its entirety, whereby reflecting on true sufferings and now true origins, one wants to gain freedom from true sufferings and its causes, the afflictions, and having deep and abiding faith in the three jewels, that by cultivating the Dharma within, I will gain freedom from samsara in its entirety, we go for refuge to the three jewels. So here, the faith is still in the three jewels, and particularly in developing the Dharma within, but the fear is in relation to cyclic existence in its entirety. I do not want to remain in this prison of pain any longer. This, then, is the indispensable foundation for the refuge of the Mahayana, because there, the fear is in relation to the sufferings of samsara, but in relation to all sentient beings, not just oneself, to all sentient beings. And then the faith is again to the three jewels, that by developing the Dharma within, the Dharma of the Mahayana, I will be able to guide all beings to gain freedom from their samsara. So this is how, by engaging in these meditations, in the graduated sequence of the Lamrim, one's refuge deepens. So here we come to recognize in these trainings here that the source of our suffering is not the people that we know or have known, that we've had conflict with, or who have power over us. They're not the people in the world who have power and are causing problems. The source of our suffering is our afflictions. Therefore, how we respond to what we encounter in the world, what we encounter directly, what we encounter indirectly, how we respond determines on whether we're creating the causes for suffering or not. This needs to be taken to heart, so that where our mind is focused is not so much on the outer goings on of our life, but rather on how we are responding to it. So that, for example, whilst we are listening to and looking and thinking about what we are engaging with, we don't see as, for example, what someone says to us or what someone does towards us as of primary importance. It's important, but not to the extent that it should dominate our mind, because of what is of primary importance is our response. Initially, ensuring our response isn't afflicted. Encountering something that we like, ensure that attachment doesn't arise and deceive us. Something we dislike, that anger doesn't arise and deceive us. When we have trained well, our focus will be more on how we are responding to what we encounter rather than what is said or what is done. This means by taking care of our mind, we're taking care of our response, and we will be able to be genuinely patient. In other words, our mind will stay undisturbed in the face of any adversity because we are concerned with our mind, not with the adversity. And then when it's in relation to how others are acting or speaking towards us, not taking it so personally because we're not getting caught up in what we assume they're thinking of us, not getting caught up in that. Our mind will be spacious and calm and compassion for the suffering being, the afflicted being before us will arise. We will notice the difference in how we are moving through our life as opposed to how others are. And from this, compassion will arise. So to get to this point is entirely possible for all of us. It takes time, and it takes constant vigilance of one's mind, being mindful, in particular of the faults of the afflictions and the antidotes to apply. But by doing so, being vigilant, being mindful over a protracted period, what matters to you will become that my mind is not afflicted, but virtuous. And what's going on around me, what I'm encountering, is lesser to that. And in this way, our mind will start to become ever more dominated by virtue, and the afflictions will start to become a stranger.
All right, that is it.
Okay, thank you. Then we can conclude there for tonight. Thank you.